Let me ask you a question. What happens when the one thing a narcissist thrives on, attention, reaction, drama, suddenly disappears? What happens when you stop feeding the beast? They crumble, because their worst enemy is not your anger. It's not your revenge. It's your silence. Silence is power. And today, I'm going to show you why your silence is not weakness. It's warfare. When you stop dancing to their tune, when you stop explaining, defending, justifying, you take your power back. And the moment you reclaim your power, the narcissist loses theirs. You see, narcissists are addicts, addicted to control, addicted to attention, addicted to your emotional reaction. They feed off your outrage, your confusion, your pleas for clarity. But what happens when you go quiet? When you walk away with dignity instead of fighting with fire? You become untouchable. Because silence does something louder than words ever could. It forces the narcissist to hear their own emptiness echoing back at them. Let me tell you a truth most people won't. The narcissist doesn't fear being hated. They fear being ignored because hatred still gives them significance. But silence tells them you don't matter anymore. It is the ultimate rejection. The one thing they can't spin, can't manipulate, can't control. Now I know it's not easy. You want to speak. You want to scream. You want to explain why they hurt you, how they broke you. But that explanation, that closure, it's a trap. You're giving them another chance to gaslight you, to twist it all around, to rope you back into the cycle. Don't give them that. Give them nothing. Silence is not passive. Silence is strategic. It says, I see you, I understand you, I know your game, and I no longer participate. It's saying, you do not get to rent space in my mind for free anymore. That silence is the sound of you healing, growing, evolving. It is the sound of your freedom. So today I challenge you not to react, not to fight, not to explain, but to go silent, not in fear, but in power, because your silence speaks volumes. It says, I've won, I've moved on, I am no longer yours to manipulate. And when the narcissist sees that, when they see your silence isn't weakness, but strength, they'll feel the one thing they cannot handle: irrelevance. Let your silence be your legacy. Let it be the proof that you didn't just survive, you outgrew them. You don't owe them a word, because you already spoke the loudest truth of all. By walking away in silence, narcissists thrive on attention. It's their fuel, their oxygen. Every time you argue, explain, justify, or react emotionally, you're feeding that insatiable need for control and validation. They don't care if the attention is positive or negative. All they care about is that you're still giving it. When you speak, they twist your words. When you cry, they interpret it as proof of their power. When you try to explain yourself, they hear opportunity to manipulate, to confuse, to reassert dominance. This is how they keep you in their cycle. The more you react, the more control they have. But silence is different. It is the complete withdrawal of supply. It's the unexpected, unmanageable response they fear the most. When you go silent, you're saying, you no longer have access to me. I'm not your emotional puppet anymore. That silence doesn't just confuse them, it destabilizes them. They're left without the script, without the cues they use to play their mind games. They can't handle it, because it forces them to confront something they avoid at all costs: their own emptiness. When you remove the attention, you also remove their ability to feel superior, significant, or powerful in your life. They're left staring into the mirror with no reflection to manipulate. And that is where the real shift happens, not just for them, but for you. In silence, you reclaim your energy. You stop being reactive and start being intentional. You begin to see just how much of your identity was tangled up in their chaos, and how liberating it feels to no longer participate in it. Silence becomes your armor. It's not about being cold or punishing, it's about protecting your peace. It's about sending a clear message: I've chosen myself. And the more consistently you choose silence over reaction, the more power you regain. The narcissist no longer gets to dictate the rhythm of your emotions. They don't get to spark a fire every time they want to feel in control. Your silence is the fireproof wall. It's the boundary that finally holds. Narcissists are not afraid of being hated. In fact, hate still gives them significance. If you're angry at them, you're still focused on them. You're still emotionally invested, and that means to them they still matter. They can twist hate into a badge of honor, spin it as proof that you're obsessed, unstable, or bitter. But the one thing they cannot manipulate, cannot tolerate, and cannot twist into power is irrelevance. And that's exactly what silence brings. When you become silent, you deny the narcissist their favorite game, emotional warfare. You stop responding to their bait, you stop answering their texts filled with half-truths and provocations, and you no longer play the role they've assigned to you. Suddenly, they are left alone with themselves, and that's the scariest place for a narcissist to be. Without someone to control, project onto, or gain superiority over, they feel exposed, powerless. Forgotten, your silence forces them to question their own significance, because for once, someone they couldn't break has walked away and didn't look back. This irrelevance cuts deeper than any insult ever could. You are not reacting, you are not chasing, you are not explaining, you are simply absent, not in body and energy. You are no longer emotionally available for their manipulation, and that's the real punishment to a narcissist. It's not the loss of a relationship, it's the loss of their control over your emotional world. When someone no longer gives them attention, even in anger, the narcissist begins to unravel. They lose their identity, which is often defined by the reactions they pull from others. That's why they'll try to provoke you when you go silent. They may love, bomb, guilt, trip, spread rumors, or suddenly act like the victim, anything to pull you back into the game. But if you stay silent, if you remain grounded and refuse to respond, they start to panic. Their fear of irrelevance becomes reality. Your lack of reaction is the mirror they can't shatter. They see themselves for who they are, not through your words, but through your absence. And nothing terrifies a narcissist more than a person who once gave them energy and now gives them nothing. Reacting emotionally is exactly what the narcissist wants from you. Every outburst, every tear, every attempt to explain yourself, it's all ammunition for them. They don't see your emotion as vulnerability or sincerity. They see it as leverage. They use your reactions to validate their power, to convince themselves they still control your world. The more emotionally tangled you become, the more they manipulate those emotions to distort reality. They twist your pain into guilt, your questions into accusations, and your truth into lies. This cycle isn't accidental, it's intentional. It's how they keep you stuck. Narcissists are master provocateurs. They study your buttons, they know what to say to trigger you, and they know how to pull you back in right when you start to pull away. When you argue, they don't listen, they strategize. When you defend yourself, they don't consider your words, they look for openings to flip the script. You think you're having a conversation, but they're playing a game of control. And as long as you're emotionally reacting, you're playing by their rules. That's why emotional detachment, not coldness, but calm awareness, is the most powerful shift you can make. When you stop reacting, when you respond with neutrality or silence, you remove their power source. Suddenly, they have nothing to manipulate, no outrage to twist, no confusion to exploit. Your lack of emotional reaction creates a space of clarity for you. It gives you the distance to see through their tactics. You start to notice patterns, not just episodes. You begin to see the truth behind the drama, and with that clarity comes strength. The strength to stop explaining yourself to someone who never intended to understand you. The strength to hold boundaries without the need to justify them. The strength to walk away without feeling guilty. When you stop giving the narcissist the emotional reaction they crave, you begin to break the cycle they rely on to control you. You start to heal, not because they changed, but because you did. You start to realize that peace is more powerful than proving a point, and silence is more devastating to a narcissist than any shouted truth ever could be. Silence is often misunderstood as weakness, But in the context of dealing with a narcissist, it is the ultimate act of strength. It is a boundary that cannot be negotiated, manipulated, or crossed. Unlike spoken words, which can be twisted or used against you, silence is untouchable. It offers no fuel, no reaction, and no emotional supply. It sends a clear and powerful message without ever needing to explain a thing. You no longer have access to me. Narcissists thrive in chaos, in noise, in conflict, but silence creates a vacuum they cannot fill. When you go silent, you are no longer participating in the game. You are no longer defending yourself against false accusations or reacting to their mind games. You are not just stepping away physically, you are cutting off the energy that keeps them feeling powerful. Silence is a refusal to be controlled. It says, I'm no longer explaining my worth to someone who's committed to misunderstanding it. It is a form of protection, not punishment. It is how you safeguard your emotional health from the constant turbulence a narcissist brings. This silence becomes your boundary, a line they cannot cross because you're no longer standing on the battlefield. You've stepped away entirely, and that absence forces the narcissist to deal with something they despise, their own powerlessness. The moment you stop responding, they lose their ability to influence your decisions, your mood, your life. It's a shift from reaction to intention. You're no longer responding to them, you're responding to yourself, to your needs, to your healing. The beauty of this boundary is that it is both simple and impenetrable. It requires no explanation, no confrontation, and no justification. It exists solely because you decided it must. And that decision, that quiet assertion of your own worth, shakes the very foundation of the narcissist's illusion of control. They can't argue with silence. They can't twist silence. All they can do is face it, and in doing so, face the truth that they are no longer important enough to get a reaction. That's where your power lies, in that boundary, in that silence, in that unwavering commitment to choose peace over chaos, dignity over drama, and self-respect over being understood by someone who never truly listened. Walking away without explanation is one of the most powerful moves you can make when dealing with a narcissist. It goes against everything they expect and depend on. Narcissists are masters at drawing people into long, drawn-out conversations that serve one purpose: to regain control. They want closure to be on their terms. They want the final word. They want you to beg, cry, or plead so they can either reject you again or pretend to offer reconciliation not out of love, but as a tactic to keep you emotionally entangled. By walking away without a word, you deny them that script. You deny them closure they can manipulate. This act of leaving without explanation is not about avoiding confrontation. It's about refusing to give energy to someone who has proven they will only use it against you. It's about finally realizing that the person who caused the damage is not the person who can help you heal. Narcissists do not hear your explanations the way you intend them. They're not listening for truth, they're listening for weakness. They take your reasons and spin them, reframe them, use them as a tool to reassert dominance or cast themselves as the victim. When you walk away quietly without giving them a final speech or emotional goodbye, you maintain your dignity. You control the exit. It's no longer about them and their reaction. It's about you and your decision to reclaim your peace. You step out of the narrative they've tried to trap you in and write a new one that centers your voice, your needs, and your boundaries. Most importantly, walking away without explanation forces the narcissist to sit with uncertainty, which they hate. They don't get to know what you're thinking, planning, or feeling. That loss of insight frustrates them deeply because their control relies on reading and exploiting your emotions. The silence leaves a void they can't fill with excuses or blame shifting. They're left with nothing but their own discomfort and confusion. It takes courage to leave without closure, especially when you've been conditioned to believe you owe someone an explanation. But with a narcissist, every explanation is another door they'll try to wedge open. Closing it silently is the truest declaration that you are done not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. Your silence is more than the absence of words. It is the presence of self-respect, healing, and growth. It is the sound of transformation happening from within. When you choose not to respond to manipulation, not to engage in arguments, and not to explain your worth, you're not being passive, you're building something powerful inside yourself. That silence becomes your sacred space. It becomes the ground where clarity grows, where peace returns, and where your true self begins to re-emerge after being buried under constant emotional chaos. A narcissist wants you to stay emotionally reactive because it keeps you tied to them. But when you go silent, not just externally but internally, you cut those emotional cords. You stop living in response to someone else's dysfunction. You start living for your own alignment, your own balance, your own truth. In that quiet space, you begin to feel what peace really is, and you realize how long you've been surviving without it. That realization is the beginning of true healing. Growth often doesn't shout. It whispers. It takes place in the quiet moments when you don't text back, when you ignore the bait, when you choose to journal instead of argue, when you sit with your feelings rather than projecting them. In those moments, you're reclaiming control over your life. You're teaching yourself that you don't need to be heard by someone who never listened anyway. You're learning that your energy is precious, and silence is how you protect it. And through that silence, you begin to reconnect with parts of yourself that were neglected or suppressed. The parts that didn't feel safe, valued, or seen in the chaos of the narcissist's presence. You start nurturing those parts. You start speaking kindly to yourself. You start rediscovering your voice, not the one that screams to be understood, but the one that quietly declares, "I matter, and I'm done proving it." This healing creates an inner strength that can't be faked. You become grounded, self-aware, and emotionally stable. The narcissist no longer has power over your peace. Their attempts to provoke you fall flat because you've changed the rules. You're no longer seeking revenge or closure. You're seeking yourself and finding that in silence, you already have everything you were looking for: